Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining me. I'm Dr. Philip McMillan, and I've brought this image here with the intention of shocking the audience, challenging the audience, because we're at a stage now where questions really need to be answered urgently. Many lives seem to be being lost unexpectedly, and we have another one here. And this one has gained the news because of who it is, Alice Stewart, and our condolences to the family. She's only 58, and this was unexpected. Again, there are many reasons that people can die suddenly, but this seems as though it's happening a little bit too often. And there needs to be a thorough investigation as to the mechanisms. This is what I'll be trying to take you through now. And this case is not meant to point to a specific mechanism, but to highlight the kind of research that is needed to be done. At this point, the only thing that can be acceptable are autopsies after autopsies after autopsies. Nothing else is relevant because we really, really need answers. And this was highlighted even more when we had this conversation yesterday with Dr. Shetty and Dr. Triantos, as we looked and reflected at the kind of screening that needs to be done to identify who may be at risk for some of these unusual clots that have been being seen. Before I start, I'd again like to remind you to look in the description. Remember to subscribe. There is a little button right here on the screen that you click on to subscribe. Additionally, just below, if you click on the description and see more, you will see information about Humming Heroes. We're pushing this along. It's very important to help people to understand nitric oxide in terms of battling the COVID pandemic. So this is what this is about. In a story format, please continue to support our work. Additionally, coming up this Thursday, for those who have been joining me, Advanced COVID 360, organ damage from virus and vaccine, spike protein. And as I said, you can register here. Join us again in the sixth part, actually the seventh part of this comprehensive course that we're putting together. And for those people who don't know, join us again. The link is in the description. So far, we have reached up to about 38 modules. So this is a comprehensive course, and it's likely to be over 40 modules in total that will be involved. So please join us on this educational program. It's a way of supporting the research. So let's get back to this question. Why am I highlighting this about a silent clot? It's because of the Embalmers discussion that we had. And yesterday, when we had that discussion, looking at potential mechanisms for why embalmers are seeing really unusual clots. This is what was thought to be a conspiracy early in the pandemic. It was being noticed far more frequently in 2021. Only recently, I had the honor of speaking to a whistleblower who worked in a lab and who was involved in pulling out clots, and he showed multiple examples of this kind of strange, unusual fibrous clot. There is a link in the description if you want to take a look at it. And again, just as a reminder as to what it is we're up against, I'd just like to warn you before I show this, please, if you are squeamish, look away at this point. This is an example of one of the clots that was recently pulled out. And what I want to highlight here is as I zoom in on it, this red part here is the normal part of the clot, but you can see this very white fibrous string part, which seems to be that fibrous part that is involved, which is not typical and extremely hard to degrade. So it's extremely important for us to understand what these mechanisms are and to try and figure out how to make a difference. Now, why I said silent is because one of the interesting things that we have in medicine is that not everybody has symptoms. And people who have symptoms are oftentimes upset that they're struggling with symptoms. You can see it with long COVID patients as well. But in reality, the fact that you have symptoms at least indicates that there is a problem. There is a large cohort of people who have no symptoms but are still at risk. And we see what happens with hypertension, a typical example of a silent killer. If you don't know that you have hypertension and you leave it for many years, you could end up with a heart attack or a stroke or a bleed. And this is a typical example of that silent problem. We seem to be also having this in relation to clots. Now, what I'm using as an example here is angina. For those people who don't quite understand angina, and this is taken from Harvard, this is all the way from 2015. So, when the heart muscle doesn't get enough blood, you get chest pain. And it's usually on exertion. You're going upstairs, going up a hill. But guess what? Some people might not feel anything at all. So that's the silent ischemia. And the fact that they're not feeling anything is not a good thing, because what it means is that they have no symptoms that are relevant in terms of their disease presentation. That means that you can't intervene, because those people who have symptoms regularly and multiple times they're having exertional pain, you send them to the cardiologist will do an angiogram, it will show blocked blood vessels, it will be open, stented, they'll be put on medication for life and significantly reduce their long-term risk. Who is a problem are those people who don't have any symptoms. And I think that the case that was recently highlighted here is very, very important. Now, I'm highlighting this from a Daily Mail article, and this was only published today. And it highlighted that she appeared to lead a relatively healthy lifestyle and only last month posted photos of taking part in a 10-mile run. So, this is a short marathon. The event was very sudden. And so when we look at it clinically, the causes of a sudden event like that in somebody who is naturally that fit and active, whilst it could still be a cardiac event like a heart attack doesn't usually make somebody die suddenly. A heart attack with an arrhythmia could. But what usually causes a very sudden passing is either an arrhythmia in the heart or a massive clot going to the lung. Now, we can only speculate. And my hope in this case, this is why I'm raising it, I would like, please, for people to do full autopsies here. And this is something that if the CNN really wanted to help here, they would insist on full autopsies. And I'll be able to tell you what it is that we need to understand. And so, just a typical autopsy where they look externally at the organs is not adequate. We need histology. We need to know exactly what was going on in the heart. And critically, I want to know exactly what was going on in the context of the blood vessels. Because as I said, if this wasn't a heart attack, then it would probably have been a massive clot that would cause such a deterioration in such a short time. I'm going to take you through a couple of slides here, and I'm going to use them as the template to show what it is that I'm looking for. So let's start with some basic stuff. If we were talking about a heart attack, this is usually what it tends to look like. You have here the heart and the blood vessels, and this is one of the big blood vessels on the surface, the anterior descending artery. Um, this is what it looks like with nothing really. Then that blood vessel can get a fatty streak. Then that gets to be intermediate lesion. Then it becomes an atheroma. Then it becomes a fibrous plaque. And by this point, you can see that more than 50% of the lumen is lost. So at this point, somebody may start having angina type symptoms. By the time it has reached here, where they get a tear in this fibrous plaque, which then blocks the blood vessel and causes a massive clot, that's when they could end up with damage to the heart, and that is the heart attack. And the point is that oftentimes people at this stage may have no symptoms, even though they are highly there's a higher chance that it could go on to rupture and actually cause a heart attack. That's the silent ischemia. It's not in anybody's interest for it to be silent. Now, the piece that I need answers on, and this is what we were discussing in the discussion yesterday about these clots, these abnormal clots that are being formed. They seem to be forming in the inferior vena cava. So this is important. So this is an example showing you the heart here, and the heart is pumping blood through the aorta, which then goes down. This is the descending aorta. It splits to the legs. So that's in red, and then there are branches going off to the brain and to the arms. In blue is the venous system, and so it's bringing black blood from the legs, and the iliac veins meet together, and then they form the inferior vena cava, which carries blood back to the heart, and then from the brain and the arms, the superior vena cava brings blood down. And so this blood vessel is the one I'm particularly interested in, because I, I suspect, based on the clots that we have been seeing that are being shown, a lot of them seem to be being formed in that inferior vena cava. The blood flow is a little bit slower, and there's less oxygen in it, and maybe that's part of the reason why it is occurring. Here is a reminder of what these blood vessels look like. In reality, this is an artery, but there's a reason I've highlighted this. This could be the aorta, and you have three different sections. This is the intima on the inside. Then you have the media, tunica media, which is the muscle. And then you have the adventitia on the outside. And this bit on the inside, where you see this yellow bit here that looks like cheese, this is the elastic. This allows the blood vessel to expand and with the pressures in it. And then you have a big muscle, smooth muscle on the outside of that. And then you have more elastic again. So a double layer of elastic. And then on the outside, you have the adventitia. And this has blood vessels that then supply all the muscle and all of this around. So this is a very important part. And what we found is that in the recent case where somebody had a dissection, these blood vessels were involved in the inflammatory process. And so I then began to think, could it be that they are also involved in the context of these big venous blood vessels? So when you look at the histology of these blood vessels, this is the vein now, this is the inferior vena cava, you have still an external part, a media part, and an intima part. And this intima part is the endothelial lining that is very smooth. The muscle is much thinner, but it's still present because these blood vessels do contract, even though they're veins. But on the outside here, you have the externa, which again has vasa vasorum on the outside. So the blood supply is still present on the outside of these big veins. And the question is if the process of inflammation can occur in arteries, why not in veins? Now, what you have to realize is that when you think about how these blood vessels work, and I'll go back to this here, the inside, the endothelium, is extremely smooth. It's perfectly smooth. And even the slightest bit of damage to it will immediately start to make clots. And so this is the bit that I think is very relevant about what could be happening. So I've brought here now the example of what happens when you have a clot. So you just have to imagine that this is the inferior vena cava. These are the endothelial cells, normally nice and smooth. The blood flow is going along. And then there is some damage to one of the endothelial cells down here, which immediately then triggers clot formation. And this is what a clot looks like. He captures all the red blood cells and the platelets are there. And then the body is at the same time breaking it down so that it's a balanced process. But what seems to be happening in the context of these very big clots is that it's no longer just red blood cells, platelets, and fibrin, but all other kinds of strange proteins get added to it so that it becomes fibrous. This is where spike proteins can come in, antibodies can come in, abnormal protein formation that can occur will then get deposited, and then this clot starts to grow. That's just a theory. But this is where the research needs to go. What I need to know is, in this case, not just this case, in every case where it's unexpected, here is the kind of research we need. One, if somebody dies unexpectedly, it's almost certainly going to be an arrhythmia if it happens very quickly, meaning that they just collapse. Very few things that will cause somebody to die within a few minutes. An arrhythmia tends to stand out as being one of them. The other one that can do it very suddenly is a clot, big clot on the lung, where it blocks the blood supply and the person just collapses and they can die in a few minutes. So, what we need is that we need detailed analysis of the heart muscle. And we're looking for inflammatory changes that are present in the arteries, in the veins, in the muscle tissue. We want to know which cells are involved, and we want to know whether or not there's any evidence of spike protein deposition, whatever the source. Is that driving or causing any of the inflammatory process? The other thing that I think we need now is that on every patient, we need a more detailed examination of their big vessels. So the aorta, we need a piece of the aorta to be examined, looking again for inflammatory changes, specifically in the vasa vasorum. As well, we need to look at the inferior vena cava. Are we seeing patterns where these kind of changes are occurring that need to be addressed? There's still a lot of work that needs to be done, and it's only done through autopsy. So, anybody who is talking about no evidence, if they have not got, and I don't mean 3 autopsies, I'm talking about thousands of autopsies across the world being done. It is so important that we're likely to have to invest. When they're talking about all the money that needs to be going into developing some new vaccines for other diseases that don't come, why don't they just take a small portion of that and invest it in trying to understand the characteristics of the diseases that we are seeing? We need autopsy upon autopsy upon autopsy. We don't need 10. We don't need 100. We need thousands. We need to understand patterns of disease. I would go as far as to say every single death that is unexpected in someone where there is no clear cause for the death has to have full, detailed autopsy with histological analysis. Some people don't like that kind of discussion, and it's because they're concerned about an elephant in the room. They have actually made up their minds that they know what it is, and so they don't want to look. I can't say for certain, but even if it is this elephant in the room, we still need to understand the mechanisms. We still need to understand what needs mitigating. This is where we are. We need answers. We can't afford to have more and more people continue this role of dying suddenly. There's a responsibility. And if anyone from CNN or anywhere like that is listening, your greatest opportunity for a legacy for her is to make sure that we reduce the risk of this happening to others while we have a chance. We're very saddened that not just Alice has passed away, but many others in similar circumstances have as well. And sadly, there doesn't seem to be the political or scientific appetite to try and understand exactly what these mechanisms are. So, again, I encourage you, please, to look in the description. Remember to click on the subscribe button. There's a bell that will be right here on the video. Join us as we continue to discuss difficult science. Let's see if we can find ways to mitigate this silent killer that is likely to continue to grow over the next few years. Have a great evening.